My name is Azam. I'm a co-founder of Distru. We're software for cannabis distributors and manufacturers to manage their business operations while staying compliant with track and trace system. And yeah, kind of excited to have this panel and to do this. So we have two people here. There were supposed to be more people here, but first I'd like to start by introducing Kirk Grogan, who's the CEO of Wick and Mortar. And we have Claudio Miranda, who's a co-founder and head of marketing and, everything else that comes with that responsibility of Guild Extracts. So guys, maybe start off by telling us a little bit about yourselves and, your companies and kind of what does marketing mean to you?
Sure thing. Jumping in. So Wick and Mortar is the longest running cannabis branding and marketing agency in the world right now. Been around for just over a decade, just celebrated our 10 years. Started specifically back in the black market days and then moving into medical market, and then we finally now transitioned into recreational a few years back with it. Headquartered up in Seattle, but we have clients all across the United States and all across the world in every legal market. Marketing in that sense in the cannabis industry is really interesting and unique, and you watch it grow and what the innovation aspect of it is. A lot of it comes down to really trying to dive into your customers and understand them, connect with them on a level that is deeper than just social media ads and those kind of things, as many of you are aware, that are unavailable to us. So it's how you build in strategies that allow people to be loyal to you and find a specific brand. And obviously, as an agency, we're unique in the fact that we get to work with hundreds of different brands across all spectrums, from the largest publicly traded companies in the world all the way down to startups that just got funded that have no clue how to penetrate a market and jump on in. So excited to get to talk to you all about that a little bit, and I'll hand it over to Claudio.
Cool, thank you. So my name is Claudio, and I'm with Guild Extracts. We actually have a family of brands under the Guild Enterprises moniker, and Guild Extracts is probably the one that's most well known. As mentioned, I run marketing for Guild Extracts, and we're a seed to sale family of brands originally, but again, really Extracts has been our main focus. So for us, with marketing, we've been around for about 4 or 5 years, and we really, we can be considered a legacy brand within the industry in the sense that we've been in the California market since the medical days. And so as you guys know, that whole kind of landscape has shifted greatly, especially over the last couple of years. Starting in the medical market was a very different marketing challenge. Then the demographics and the landscape was very different. We kind of were born out of the underground scene as a company that specializes in, as a company that specializes in dabbables and extracts. That used to be kind of a core heart of the industry to some extent, where a lot of the connoisseurs really gravitated toward. And for those of you that were around in those days, there's a lot of underground events that catered to that. And it was very underground because extracts back then was very legal in terms of doing type 7 manufacturing, as we call it here in California, doing volatile extractions like BHO. It was something that we were forced to go underground, and if we were caught blasting, so to speak, there was felony offenses associated with that. And that was one of the last kind of legal aspects of the market in terms of cultivation and retail, and those aspects of cannabis commerce became legal a lot sooner than volatile manufacturing. And to have a lab doing that just 2 years ago was an illegal practice. So we had to keep a lot of our practices underground, interestingly. And so we were born out of a grassroots approach to marketing. And I'm happy to kind of talk more about that. But I think as we move from kind of black market to white market, we're very excited to explore all the possibilities that offers us.
So yeah, let's maybe segue a little bit into about like any specific campaigns that, obviously you dealt with a variety of brands. What are the different types of campaigns that you guys have been executing? How have those been evolving over the years, and what are you noticing that's paying off?
Great question. I think jumping from the back, working our way to the front there, what pays off the most, in my opinion, is education. People are thirsty to learn. That's consumers. They want to know what's going on. You see a lot of trouble and a lot of opportunity, I'll say, in the vape market right now with what's going on with the education around that and what is harmful and what is not. And you get to see that from a lot of standpoints. CBD has been unbelievably beneficial about education and what goes on with it. Does it help? Do you need an entourage effect from other terpenes? Do you need entourage effect from THC? Does that make it more effective? Answer is yes, in case anyone's out there. But you play through it from a lot of different angles. And so campaign effectiveness really looks at it. Absolutely. Looks at it from a bunch of different angles. I think a lot of people get caught up in one specific direction, and that usually is brand awareness. That's, I'm going to put my name out there in a magazine. I'm going to buy a billboard on the side of a highway. It's all of these different elements. And those are great, and that's step one, right? You need people to recognize your brand, your logo, so when they're in a dispensary, they can buy your product. But that's not it. What you need to work towards is loyalty. And so that's where we drive a lot of our effort with our campaigns today, is learning how to drive people and what makes them tick, what makes them tailored to a specific audience. One of the things we see as a mistake most often is people going very broad, thinking the entire market, anybody who's ever smoked cannabis is your consumer. That's incorrect. So finding that niche and finding that loyalty and then expanding outwards from there once they love you, once they tell all of your friends, it's a tight-knit community, right? Everyone who grew up smoking usually surrounds themselves with other people who grew up smoking. We know each other, especially when it was illegal. It's kind of forced community. And so now that it's becoming back into the recreational market, people communicate, people talk about what that is. So if you can drive that loyalty with one or a small group of individuals, they will spread by word of mouth on their own. So you really just have to concentrate on getting the messaging right, the branding right, the story right, so that a small group of individuals can really connect with you. And that's, I think, the most effective campaigns that we see. And how that impacts your brand depends on what your brand goes for. But it always comes down to that same aspect, I really believe, is making sure it's not just brand awareness. People can recognize your logo, they can see your name, that's great. But do they know what your brand stands for? Do they know why they care about it? Are you recycling? Are you giving back? Are you known for quality? Are you edgier and you're applying to those people who came from the black market days? Those are all viable strategies. But you kind of have to dial into one and really, really dive deep.
Yeah, I mean, I'd completely agree with that. And just to piggyback on that a little bit, you know, it was, as you said, back in the day, it was just anyone who smoked weed was your customer, right? And the brand was Ziploc, right? And now that as we've evolved, right, we're getting into now, you know, really sophisticated branding and marketing that's starting to emerge. Especially, I mainly speak from the California market, so for us, it's a little bit newer here. But just watching that transition is really exciting, going from this kind of like nebulous, like, hey, do you smoke weed? And I'm selling you flower, to now not only all the customer segmentation that we're seeing, but the variety of products that you can offer. And I think, you know, to your point, you really got to first and foremost understand your customer. And the corollary of that, this thing keeps shutting off. The corollary of that is making sure you have a brand that really resonates with that customer and developing those experiences that really do have that resonance with your customer. So it's really kind of planting a firm stake in the ground. And I think when you look at brands in the marketplace, you know, ask yourself, who is their customer? What do they stand for? What is the values and mission of that brand? And does there seem to be alignment between that market positioning and who that end customer is? And I think that to the degree you can have that kind of hyper focus, you're going to be successful. So going on to the kind of the question there with campaigns, I mean, first and foremost, then as you're developing a campaign, I would encourage you to look at market segmentation then not only with your customers, but geographically. I mean, it's interesting just here in San Francisco, for example, if you look at a store like Harvest in the Richmond and you compare that with Harvest in the Mission, you have radically different demographics, right? There's going to be a lot of overlap there, but you're dealing with a very different demographic. You know, as an extract brand that covers from dabbables all the way to cartridges, you know, we got to be mindful of that as we go from markets like San Diego to Orange County to LA to San Francisco, et cetera. A very different customer demographics there. So we have a similar customer in all of those markets, but they do vary in terms of how we might have a brand activation on a store level. So to go back to the Harvest example, you know, we might focus more on our vaporizers, on our cartridges, and some of the edibles that we're now experimenting with in the Richmond store because of the demographic that you see at that venue, as well as they have a lounge and there's just a different experience and opportunity there, whereas you switch to a store like one in the Mission or ones in other urban areas where that demographic can shift considerably, we have to recalibrate our marketing approach to how we interact with customers in those stores, which SKUs we focus on. If we're doing promotions and demo days, there's not just like a vanilla approach, so let's do like the same demo day in every single store or have the same experience. Usually we're going to try to tailor that to the store based on that geographic market and then going back to that kind of customer segmentation. So it's really good to kind of be hyper aware of those nuances across the landscape.
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point. Yeah, great answers. You know, I also think a lot about customer segment, especially for us, but let's maybe dive into a little bit about customer segmentation. You kind of brought up the point, Claudio, about different geographies have different types of, I guess you could say, customer segments that you find there. Would you say that it's wise for companies to sort of define segments more by demographics, kind of like stay-at-home soccer mom, millennial? Is that how they're thinking about it, or is it more about, or is it like something else? Is it like who they are, or is it what their behaviors are, or is it who they are because their behaviors tend to be similar?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, let me just use an analogy. I used to be in the natural products industry, and we used to sell organic products, right? And in that space, we would segment. You'd have the organic consumer, but it wasn't just the organic consumer as one singular audience, right? We divided it between the dark green and the light green, right? And the dark green would be more of the activist. That'd be a little bit more crunchy granola. You would see that person, let's say, at a Berkeley Whole Foods, right? And then you kind of swing the spectrum to the light green consumer, as we would call them, and you'd maybe find that consumer in the Mill Valley Whole Foods, right? So carrying that analogy over to cannabis is kind of like I'm saying with the differences between stores in areas like the Sunset or Richmond or just that part of the city versus more of the more core urban areas. And there you do want to look at some of the particularities there, from differences in age to spending habits to ethnographics. I mean, you're going to find really a broad range of differences in your customer, as well as a lot of similarities. But at the end of the day, you still have the commonality that are they consuming your product, right? In our case, if we're making cartridges and dabbables, we'll find across these stores that audience is there. But that audience might be a very small sliver when it comes to the dabbables or some of our more exotic extracts that require like a dab rig. And other markets, we find that they're very concentrated with that customer. So the question for us is not just how we target that, and we'll look at a campaign and how we execute that in a given location, but really the ROI of even working in that location, right? If we find a store that maybe the vast majority of the customers there don't dab at all, and maybe with cartridges, especially maybe in light of the recent scare, there's very little cartridge usage, and really the customers there go after flowers and pre-rolls and edibles, et cetera, then it's a question for us, should we really be doubling down on that store? Because there is an opportunity cost with that, right? So I think it's just really smart to analyze your stores, prioritize them, and to do that geographically, take into consideration the various things I've said.
That's a great answer. Building off of that, and to your original question with it, it is all of the above, I'd say. And I think people get lost in the idea of too much about the demographics and the stats of themselves, the age, the income, all of these individual elements, and less about what that lifestyle leads to. So as we mentioned, if it's a Whole Foods or a metropolitan market shopper, what they're looking for is something that's more associated with quality and something more associated with a limited time, something that they can go in and have a known experience with, right? It's less exploratory. It's not going to be about that. It's going to be about a known quality for a higher price, and they're okay with that. You've accepted that trade-off the moment you've walked in. So to give an example with that, we work with several companies. Michigan has just opened up as a legal market, obviously. And within that, a lot of the Michigan market is fairly blue-collar, and that's a lot of the cannabis consumption there is blue-collar. And so many of the brands and many of the stories and campaigns we put out there are not trying to be off-limits and luxurious and exclusive. They're meant to be more tailored to the individual. This is your treat after a long day at work. This is what you're able to do on the weekends when you're gathering with your friends. So it's not meant to be what you go out to a very high-end luxurious location or area. So taking everything into consideration with the demographics, you really need to understand what motivates them. I think people get lost at that first step of what is their age, what's their income, what's their ethnicity, all of these different elements, and none of that matters. What matters is taking it one step past that and understanding how that influences their buying decisions and what they do and what they prefer and their social status of how they want to be seen smoking cannabis. Some people have cannabis tied into their identity, right? You see a lot of these brands that really tailor towards that it's very much from the edgy days of the past. And then you have a lot of these that really tailor to the business professional who smokes outside of the office, right? Doesn't let people know what they're doing, but it's something that they use to unwind and relax. And so both of those are entirely different motivations, and brands and campaigns specifically really have to try to speak to those using those demographics.
So just a quick follow-on to that, like what are you guys noticing that's actually driving sort of repeat purchase and loyalty? Would you say it's really just how much they resonate with the brand? Is it the experience they had with the product quality? I mean, no, like last year there used to be a lot of product inconsistencies, and I think now that's sort of equalized. Now you have more of a stable kind of repeat brand experience. But before you would eat like an edible and you would just be floored, and then now you eat it, now you're like, okay, I know what I'm getting into. So is it just like, is it the brand itself? Is it how the brand's positioning itself? Is it, how the brand is communicating directly on social channels? Or is it the bud tender? Obviously, it's all of the above, but what's really kind of contributing to loyalty, and where should the audience kind of focus their attention?
Yeah, look, I think for different companies, there'll be different answers to that. At Guild, we've always kind of stood on the premise of, executing on high product quality. I'm of a strong believer, just generally speaking, that your job first and foremost as a company and as a marketer or any function in the company is to execute on excellence with your product or service. If you execute an amazing product that delivers a consistent value proposition to your customers and it delights them consistently, you will find that they will become your marketing engine of growth. You want excited, happy customers who love your product intrinsically, and to the degree that you don't execute on that, to that degree you will rely on artificial forms of marketing. I've taught a lot of marketing classes, and I'd sometimes more as a joke tell my students that you will rely on marketing to the degree that your product sucks. And now that being said, that's a generality, and I don't totally believe that in the sense that there's always room for marketing. You always have, especially as things get competitive and this industry grows, marketing will always be an essential part of any company's kind of toolkit. But I think that there's some truth in that, in what I'm saying, that if you're really, really strong on the product side, your customers will gravitate around that. And if you find an early adopter, kind of innovative early consumer that can gravitate around that product and really understand the value of it, they're going to be your most outspoken customers. And there you just have to kind of using kind of the speak of the technology industry here in the Silicon Valley is you want to just create viral hooks from there, right? You want to give your customers the mechanisms to rejoice and sing your brand's praises because they want to of their own accord. And this should resonate with all of us in the sense of, think about a movie you recently saw or a restaurant you recently went to or a book you recently read that you just loved, that because it was so intrinsically great that you loved it, you of your own accord will share that with everybody. You will recommend it to everybody. You will stand on the highest building and sing its praises, and you're not being paid for that. You do it because someone delivered excellence to you. And that, to me, is real marketing right there. If you can achieve that on the product execution level, then you've got customers for life. That's where your loyalty is bred most effectively. Aside from that, if you're not doing that, you're always chasing customer acquisition. You're always spending a lot of money on customer acquisition, and that acquisition cost is going to be expensive if it does not translate into long-term loyalty and retention, which is hard to preserve if you don't have a great, consistent value proposition.
I love that. And to piggyback on that, customer acquisition is one of the things I see people struggle with the most. And they're spending so much time and effort to get people to notice their brand, and they're tipping all of their cards with that. There's no depth to it. And you mentioned, I use the term layers when I talk about it with brands. And what I want is for you to be able to have different layers that they can expose themselves to. Not everything is shown up front. Not all of the prime goods are right there. Packaging is a good example. Standing out on the shelf. Cannabis is unique because everyone who goes to a store is there specifically for that product, right? You are against all of your competitors. There's no shampoos, there's no food, there's no other things that they could be there for that might catch. They're there to buy a product, and you are lined up with 100 of your competitors. How you look on a shelf is important. From that, how you feel when they touch your product is important. And the packaging itself, not the product it's exclusive. Opening the package can be something. And all of these are just priming. Are you giving a good experience leading to that? Are you priming them to have a good experience with the consumption of your product? All of those lead into it. I think, a lot of companies see the piece where you open a box, you pull something apart, and there's text underneath that kind of tells you, enjoy this, have a good trip, whatever it may be, right? All these little elements. Those are wonderful. Little, cute little trinkets that let people connect with you and feel that it's a little more of a personalized brand as opposed to just some large corporation. Those elements and the ability for layers to continually be exposed. I've seen AR and VR start to make a play with a QR code on the package, right? You'll scan it, and then on your phone, you get a little trippy visual of something. It can be something related to the brand. But all of those are just unique pieces, and we're talking about those hooks that allow people, give them a story to go tell their friends about. A story isn't I opened a Ziploc bag and I got high and watched a movie and passed out. That's not a story, right? A story is, I went to buy cannabis and then I scanned something on a phone and a dragon approached out of my screen and my dad, who was conservative and never wanted to try it, even asked and looked at it and got a conversation, right? All of those things move people. And that's where you need to start experiencing things with it. Marketing, again, to this point, should not be seen as just what you buy and the ads you put out there. It is how quickly you can take a customer and never have to advertise to them again, and how quickly a customer can become your sales individual, not on your payroll.
If I can just add one note to that real quick. Thank you for saying that, because the comments I made were really specifically addressed toward marketing as a promotional kind of strategy, right? Let's just remember that marketing, broadly speaking, does encompass things like research and pricing and distribution and elements like that, right? And packaging. Those are all fundamentals and essential. The point there is more so when it comes to the promotion of how do you actually get your brand out there and how do you create advocacy and really create that awareness. That's where, again, I think you should double down on product execution first and foremost.
Cool. Excellent. So kind of switching gears a little bit here, but the concept of lifestyle branding, what kind of, I guess, different clusters of lifestyle branding are there? What do you guys expect to rise? What are you seeing rise? And what do you expect to kind of fall by the wayside?
Great question. Lifestyle brand's a term that's thrown out a lot, right? It is really thrown out there. Everyone thinks they have a lifestyle brand. Everyone says they have a lifestyle brand, but few people actually invoke that with their company. And so with agency side, as we're dealing with building these brand identities for people, you can take a couple quick examples that you have darker packaging, darker marketing materials. You have pieces out there that are a little more edgy, and they're made to be, right? They're looking more from the black market days. And then you have a little more playing into the actually Southern California market, right? The surf, the light pastel colored packaging, all of those feel goods, those I'm riding on a skateboard down a pier type items, right? Those are great. And then you also have luxurious that's stepping into this place. These really high quality, high end packaging products, expensive proprietary vape cartridges and pins, all of these really unique pieces. And so there's no limit to the number of lifestyle brands and categories and subcategories you can get into. What I think people get lost in is trying to cross that boundary and not using either separate brands or understanding how to tailor products to it. And I would say with that as well, you end up losing a lot of the market in the sense that you're appealing to everyone, and so you're appealing to no one. So find that niche, own that niche, coming back to what I was talking about earlier, and really build that loyalty. Once that loyalty is established with one brand, you can spin up another brand, you can spin up a sub-product category line, that's fine. All of those things work well. But for a lifestyle brand, you have to evoke what you live. I mean, it has to be true to the company that founded it, and you have to have employees that represent that, because a brand is not just the marketing materials you put out, or your website, or your packaging, or even just the quality. All of those are very important. But what you really have to have at the end of the day is the person who's talking to a bud tender to sell your product has to evoke what that product is. And the CEO that goes and speaks on a panel has to evoke what that is. The website and the digital marketer and the PR company that works with you, they all have to be cohesive. And so you have to really keep that tailored and dialed in and know what that lifestyle is that you're after. Because if your lifestyle is cannabis, it's too broad.
Yeah, one way that I like to frame this is thinking about the difference between transactional versus transformational, something that kind of a concept I borrow from Chip Connolly. That on the one hand, all that we do in commerce is transactional, right? When you're creating products and you're selling them to your customers, that's a very kind of transactional layer to what you do. I think when you start to get into the lifestyle realm is when you start to think about the transformational aspects of your brand, right? And what that means, I mean, one way to frame that, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That on the kind of bottom level of that hierarchy, you have kind of the basic needs on the bottom levels, right? Like safety and security and food and things like that. But as you get higher up through that hierarchy, you get into concepts of like belonging and identity and self-actualization. And that's where I think lifestyle brands and lifestyle marketing really operates, right? Transactional operates on the level of just delivering kind of products and services that meet people's core needs. But when you get into more of the transformative elements, you're creating experiences and identities that resonate with your customer, right? They see a reflection of themselves in your brand, and that really touches upon the various aspects of their life, right? Consumers aren't just people, in our case, that consume marijuana, right? They're people that like to snowboard, or they're people that like to read or go to the movies or travel to other countries, right? So in identifying your target customer, you have to not just kind of identify the specific buying habits and patterns and things that relate to you transactionally, but what are the other lifestyle interests of your customers? What do they aspire to? What are their concerns and their needs? And your lifestyle brand will come to life to the degree you can communicate with them on that level. Ultimately, every human being wants to be part of something greater than themselves. And if you can create an experience where they can tap into that, that's where lifestyle marketing, I think, really has its greatest potential and power. So yeah, that's.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think that's a perfect example. And what you're really looking for is all humans, especially individuals that are trying to be unique. And that's what a lot of this lifestyle marketing is you want to be unique, but belong to a community that is also unique, right? And so you can look at, I think Monster Energy has done a wonderful job for that outside of cannabis. Red Bull has done great, but you can see Monster Energy, more people have Monster Energy tattoos than any other company's tattoos in the world. And they put out campaigns for it, they did a wonderful thing. Whether or not you like their industry, whether or not you like the extreme sports that they go after, they've really put themselves out there and let people aspire to, if you want to be known with Monster and you want to do that, you're in extreme sports. You're someone who is going out there and risking life, body, limb, all of these things for usually little pay, but it's something that puts you in the limelight and it's something that lets you feel alive. And that's where you mentioned here with this transformational is understanding what they want to be. Do they want to be seen as luxurious and off limits and exclusive? Do they want to be seen as very down to earth and open and approachable? Those are all different elements, and so take those into account as you're building what this lifestyle is that you want, and make sure that your brand speaks true to that.
Yeah, that's great. So question for you, Claudio, specific because you're obviously an operator, could you quickly describe what's your journey been in defining what Guild's brand is? Maybe just speak a little bit about what is Guild's brand and kind of how and what led to that. What things along the way caused you to maybe switch gears or?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, we view ourselves as a connoisseur brand, right? We, as I mentioned at the beginning, we were kind of born out of the kind of core segment of cannabis, the dabbers, right? And for those of you that kind of know dabbers, right, these guys are like really hardcore aficionados of cannabis, right? They live, breathe, and just experience cannabis at every step of the way. It's not just kind of like something they do when they get home and they might smoke, half a joint and call it quits, right? Most dabbers I know are dabbing around the clock, right? And so we built our brand out of that kind of connoisseur experience of again delivering a very high quality product, but doing it also under the concept of our tagline is where art meets science, and so we've really kind of focused on developing. We're very early on, by the way. If you follow our brand, as far as I'm concerned, we're in the first inning of articulating what this brand vision is really all about. But it starts with that concept of the art and science of cannabis, right? And if you have followed our brand, you'll see that we really speak to our customers on that level as far as educating them about the art side of it, which is the craftsmanship, the handiwork of how to make a super high-touch craft product that speaks to that kind of connoisseurship that we see across all product categories, right? And on the other hand is the science of it. We've really innovated some of the pioneering techniques in extraction by creating things like our isolates, like our THCA crystalline. We're known as the brand that kind of first commercially brought that to market. And by creating that, it was at the time that we invented it, not that we were the only inventors of it, but we were really the first to commercially succeed in bringing it to our customers. We really kind of hit the maximum potency you could in a cannabis product, clocking it at 99.99% pure THCA. And so for the dabber, that at the time was chasing potency. It was this race to the top for potency. Like, we just went right to the top with the invention of like that isolate of that crystalline, and dabbers just loved us to death for it. But at the end of the day, you've got to continue to reinvent yourself. So talking about the journey is, you can't just kind of rest on your laurels that you invent something or you execute a campaign or you have some press moment that really puts a spotlight on your brand. You have to constantly innovate and keep your customers engaged and attracted to what you're doing. So as we moved along, we've been able to kind of run the gamut of extracts from that kind of high potency, now swinging the pendulum to more full spectrum, right? Things that are actually deliberately lower potency so that we can bring out the aromatic and flavor profiles of our extracts. And we really specialize in pure 100% cannabis extracts, right? We have no additives, fillers, cutting agents, fake terpenes, nothing. It's just pure cannabis. And so for the connoisseur, that's really important, right? They're purists when it comes to kind of product quality. And again, we deliver that. So that's been kind of part of the journey is experimenting with that spectrum. But one last kind of part of that journey that I'll mention, is that we, as far as getting into the kind of the topic of this panel with innovation, we really got into licensing, right? And early on, we started to license our brand in the marketplace. We licensed our brand to a dispensary in San Jose. And in that dispensary, I had the opportunity to take what the vision was kind of on paper of what Guild stands for as a brand and bring it into 3 dimensions, right? And to work with architects and interior designers on conceptualizing what would our brand be if it was a retail space, right? And that's a huge challenge, right? In the world of architecture, it's a new typology to just think about what is a dispensary and how can you create that experience as something that goes beyond just selling product to creating more of an experience that you find with things like architectural spaces, right? So that was a really exciting opportunity to be able to do that. I was able to work with a designer and architect firm out of Napa that specializes in really high-end wine tasting rooms. And that, I think, pushes us toward, is a hint toward where we're going in the future. I look a lot to the wine industry for inspiration because they've developed the methodologies on how to speak to their consumers about connoisseurship and education around and enthusiasm around the grape, which in our case will be the cannabis flower and all its permutations, right? So I think education is a big part of the marketing challenge we have in our industry, and we really look forward to further exploring that.
Well, awesome. That's awesome. And I've definitely been following you guys for a while, and you guys were like the only company that would offer like CBD dab hits too at Cannabis Cups, which I thought was pretty cool. But I'll make a quick point on and obviously this is more like a consumer-oriented panel, but just for us at Distru as a software company that's tackling, track and trace compliance, we never actually really defined our brand, and that's just something we're starting to do now as we kind of entered into our 3rd year. And it's, for us, it's a lot about knowledge and education and really helping the customer and just being accessible to the customer. So there's a lot of things which, in the end, your product has to be really good, but it's also what are all the touch points with your customers? And we're now starting to track that and the whole customer experience. So yeah, hopefully, there'll be more to share on that in the future. But so question for you, Kirk, since you're kind of also on the agency side of things and maybe seeing how different brands are operating, why are some of the more newer, well-financed cannabis brands failing to get traction at retailers? How does their so strong social following, reputation, and legacy factor into the equation?
Absolutely. I think a lot of it comes from misunderstanding. Social is a great example, and what 250,000 followers on social media means to you. And the answer is that could mean a lot. That could be everything about your brand, or it could be nothing. And people don't grasp that concept with it. That social, it's easy. It's a low barrier to entry to follow a brand. I want to see what they're doing. I want to see if they educate people. Maybe they have great photos, inspirational aspects. That's all wonderful, but that doesn't translate to them going and spending $30 to $50 at a dispensary for your product. What social is a tool to continually remind people and engage people and tell them why to continue to be loyal and why your product is superior and why your quality matters and what the humanizing or personalizing factors about your brand are. But I think a lot of companies, especially big money coming into this space, misinterprets the idea that you can make there's a lot of high-quality product out there now. We are stabilizing in the market. It is less inconsistent. It is becoming more and more readily available and more predictable as to the effects of it. So all that being said, it's not just quality that you can compete on anymore, but you absolutely have to have that quality. But it's really coming down to the idea that you have to have the loyalty. Because as I mentioned earlier, and what we're talking about with this is when you're walking into a dispensary, every single one of your competitors is sitting right next to you. And people like experimenting, bud tenders like recommending new things, or companies that have sold the bud tender on what to recommend. All of these different elements depend on how people are going to consume and engage. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you very rarely get to control what your consumer will be buying, right? It is a bud tender's choice, a dispensary's choice. You can vertically integrate across, but overall, money is not going to solve that on its own. It's coming down to the loyalty factor, and that you have a product that has so much demand and so much knowledge and misinformation out there about it. You really have to find that niche with your customer. Whether that education is bringing them out about the effects that your product has or what it allows them to live, or making recommendations on how to use it and where to use it and what's the most enjoyable hike to go on in this state or that state. All of these things are great ways to get them to connect with your brand and use it. But money alone and just throwing out billboards, magazine ads, booths at conferences, all these elements don't translate to a customer coming to you. And one of the things I see the most, and we're in California, so I won't make any references to it, but you see a lot of celebrity-endorsed brands that have not gone well. And it's because there's no depth to it. A celebrity saying, this is what I like to smoke, or having an Instagram post of this being what I smoke with it, doesn't do enough for me. That doesn't move anything for me. Do I think that celebrity is an expert on cannabis? I don't know, right? So if they're not, why am I going to trust that judgment? And you see Seth Rogen coming in, and Seth Rogen has more sway in the cannabis industry, right? So paying attention to what celebrity is associated with what, and that lifestyle brand that you see on that element is always interesting. But recognizing that money itself and throwing money behind marketing is never going to do that. Or as we mentioned earlier, you'll be chasing a dragon of consumer acquisition, right? That's not a fun place to be. If it's $5 to get a customer to buy your product every time, you're losing. You're doing something wrong there. If it's $5 the first time, and after that it's 50 cents to 25 cents as you work your way down for exposure, that's great. Just keep reminding them that you exist, let them come in, make sure they know what dispensaries you sell at. But the end all is not money, and I think there is still a huge market for small, craft, curated cannabis companies who really want to find a niche and build loyalty from the ground up. Whereas buying loyalty from top down is just not an effective strategy.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll add to that is I think a lot of it comes down to values and ethos, right? I'd mentioned that I come from the natural products industry, and if you think about organic products, when it was first kind of born, right, the people that were in that industry were very similar to the people that are now in the cannabis industry, or some of the founders of the kind of the movement, is that we believe in the plant, right? Our values are closely aligned with one another and what we're doing as a movement, and there's an ethos there, right? And that's kind of hard to buy, and marketing in many ways overshoots that or misses that in many ways. I think so first and foremost, I think you've got to think about the fact that we're still at a time, right? We're at a cusp right now where we're going from the kind of the lifestyle niche that is cannabis and transforming into more mainstream, but it's still a time where that cannabis ethos and the value system that has been the heart of our industry for decades, it's still there and alive and well. And so if you have a lot of money to throw at this problem, this marketing problem, just like you said, doing billboards and ads, and whether it's digital media or traditional media, I mean, that has some efficacy, but it's ultimately going to fall flat if you're not really underpinning your brand on that kind of value system that ultimately resonates with your end customer. So think about that ethos and that value system, and really think about like your brand and your business. Like, what do you, again, stand for? And is this something that really does tie back to a core value system of the cannabis industry and why a lot of us are here and continue to kind of fight the fight that we're involved in, right? Or are you just in it for a buck? And I think the day will come where just making money just for the sake of profiting, it's coming very quickly, but even there, that's going to miss the opportunity of speaking to a large segment of the audience that does this for lifestyle reasons and value reasons.
Cool. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys found that this panel exciting. But definitely like to open it up for some questions. If you guys would like to proceed to the microphone right there. You can just go to that.
I totally agree about the opportunity of that to be a trusted information source. I think, like, unlike wine, wine, the effect is alcohol. you know if it's 12% or 5%. You know, cannabis is this whole wild other level of education. So, and I think that's the biggest opportunity for a brand or a media company. Who do you think has done the best job of becoming the trusted source of information so far?
Ooh, that's a great question. Outside of actually selling the product, Leafly is up there, right? Leafly, Weed Maps have done a great job. That's how they built their entire business. Informational, educational, and being fairly quick to announce if they know something or if they don't. They're often pretty solid. Both companies, I'd say, are very good about getting information out there and saying, hey, this is based on these studies that we've seen, but we can't confirm, right? Because as you mentioned, there's so much misinformation, and a product that has not been able to be tested or put up through any form of educational resources on a university level for many, many years, you're finally getting that level of knowledge coming through. And so I would say both those companies have done a great job with it. I'd say you could find several companies that have gotten into hot water here in Southern California for misinforming consumers and what that has looked like, and misleading about what test results come back from and whether entourage effects and medical claims and all of these ideas. So definitely be mindful that you don't want to ever lose the trust, and it's real easy to do. So I'd err on the side of caution on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely stumped by that question in the sense that I can't think of a lot that have really seized that opportunity, right? There's certainly a lot of brands out there, like ours being one of them to a small degree, unfortunately, of producing really great content, right? And you're going to find no shortage of content out there. And I'm talking about like product brands, right? I would agree with you that the companies that are doing it well are the media companies, right? That are the content companies, because that's what they do. So if you look at the magazines and you look at the information websites and whatnot, there's a lot of players in that part of it that are producing and delivering really great content. But if I interpret your question to mean like a product brand, well, it's not that there's an absence of them, but I think that we're very, very early on, and that's a great challenge for us all, right? The difficulty with it is I think people underestimate how costly it is to execute on great content marketing, right? You gotta really, and by content here, it's any type of content across any type of media, right? It can be photography, video, written content, and really going at it from a thought leadership perspective and delivering substantive content that genuinely adds value to your end customer. That's a really, really hard thing to do consistently, and it takes considerable resources to do it. You know, at Guild Extracts, it's something that's been on our radar since the beginning, but we get so absorbed in the fundamental costs of running our business, of compliance and regulation and licensing, and just trying to get a product out the door that's clean and compliant soaks up so much of our money. And we're hoping that as the industry evolves and regulation and taxation kind of softens up, we'll be able to get down to the true business of marketing, which is delivering that type of content experience. I have yet to see many brands do it really well.
I'd agree with that. And just to build onto that aspect, one of the things, as he mentioned, great content is unbelievably prohibitive. It's expensive, it's time-consuming, and it puts you at risk sometimes as you're trying to be a thought leader and you miss the mark. So what I would say, and what I see a lot of companies make the mistake, is trying to make 10 unique blog posts every month. Of this is a topic we want to talk about, this is a topic, and instead I'd like to see companies go far deeper. Take one idea and really synthesize and boil that down to its ultimate element, but then repurpose that content. A blog post is great, but that can turn into a podcast really easily, and a video blog really easily, and a next speaking engagement. So make sure that that content, when you're going that deep with it, you have a lot of different sound bites and a lot of great opportunities to repurpose that across a lot of channels, as opposed to just continually trying to pump out something because you know you're supposed to put out a blog every week.
Yeah, and one quick thing to add to that is, you know, the cannabis industry lives on Instagram, right? And so among other places, but that's where the real action is, right? And you know, and it is a content channel, right? And photography is a type of content. And so I will take back a little bit of what I said in the sense that there are a lot of brands that are executing really well on photography and videography as a content segment. And you know, I'd look at brands like Lowell, for example. If you just look at their content from a photography perspective and videography, I think they're doing an incredible job. And they're at the beginning of developing, I think, a really powerful lifestyle brand. If they can just expand that that into more of the written type of content and for informational. And that's how I initially kind of took your question, is more the educational content. That's where I feel we're lacking. But when it comes to things like video and photography, I think there's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of brands that are doing it well. But just for my personal appetite, it rings a little hollow. Like, I want substance. I want to see that education machine really turn on for our industry. And therein, I think, lies a really exciting opportunity.
Any other questions?
Yeah, how's it going? That's loud. My name is Blake. I work for a content marketing agency called Slide 32. So Claudio, if you want some help with that heavy lifting, feel free to come talk to me. So I noticed a theme that you guys bring up, which is sort of a bottleneck in your funnel around having a relationship with a bud tender. And a lot of what we're talking about is this broad consumer marketing, and I'm curious, how much weight do you guys put on marketing directly to bud tenders and building that relationship?
Absolutely. You should put a lot on that. And so one thing I'll say with that, the entire journey from your product to a consumer, you should try to lower barriers to entry, right? Make it as easy as possible, make it education, make it fun, make it enjoyable. And that same thing goes for bud tenders. Bud tenders have a ton of products to try to remember and understand and sell and recommend. And so sales collaterals and bud tender visit days, all of these things can go a long way to really helping their job out, right? Don't make them do the heavy lifting of remembering everything and kind of keeping track of it. Give them resources, put things in front of them, incentivize them in whatever ways that your market will allow. But the bud tender is always a bottleneck. That is your individual sales rep, and the worst part about it is you have no control over them generally. So really to go out of your way to make their job as easy as possible and make your product as fun to sell for them as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because the no doubt about it, bud tenders are the front lines. We all have to pay attention to the bud tender. I mean, they're that quintessential kind of touch point between your brand and the consumer, and they wield a lot of influence and power in that regard. And absolutely, that if you're going to kind of put a marketing dollar somewhere, put it toward, and here again, coming from a product brand perspective, put it toward educating your bud tenders, right? Put it toward informing them and giving them the sales and marketing tools they need to be able to effectively sell your product to that end consumer. We do it to some extent at Guild Extracts, not nearly to the degree that I wish we could, because here again, it's very hands-on. It's tough to streamline that. We have some ideas that we're developing right now, using forms of media like video and whatnot to really be able to get that process streamlined. But it's not only tough because you have so many bud tenders to go after, right? But there's a lot of turnover in the industry, right? It's just incredibly challenging. But I would agree wholeheartedly. Like, that's a great place to focus efforts.
Absolutely. And to build on that and the turnover with it, one of the things that I see with bud tenders that we try to encourage our clients to do, or we try to come up with campaigns for, is finding ways to promote that bud tender. So during deliveries and drop-offs, we usually will do a social story. We'll do something along that lines, promoting that bud tender, letting them talk about their favorite product. And what we're trying to do is most bud tenders are trying to work to another level in that industry, right? Whether it's the management moving through or finding a different cannabis company within cultivator, producer, processor to work for, but trying to make the bud tender the highlight of the show during that moment. Let your brand give him a microphone, let him be the representative for you. Really empower those bud tenders, and I think they end up showing you a lot of love back.
Yeah, and quick plug here is that there's the Bud Tender Awards. I think they're happening next week in Las Vegas, and that's an incredible event that, as a brand, if you can get there and get in front of these tastemakers and influencers of our industry, like, that's a great place to do it. I mean, you're pretty much, don't take this wrong, but like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Like, you've got a ton of people there that are the right type of people that you want to reach, and there they are. I mean, we're engaging with that to some small degree for this next week's event, but for those of you that can make it or at least follow it, I mean, those types of events are the ones you want to keep track of, among other things.
Thank you guys so much, and let's get a hand of applause. Thank you guys.